Well, welcome to Conversate, a podcast where we engage in conversation. Today, I, Pastor Kevin, engage in a conversation with Marcus Huff, Director of Youth and Campus Ministry. We're talking about the story, King Solomon, and the passage of his reign onto Rehoboam. But really, we talk a lot more about life being cyclical, patterns repeating, whether it's in the Bible or our own lives. We look to see these things that we do again and again, and yet discover that things do change, and there is someone else working in the midst of the chaos as well, who we can surrender to. So we hope you enjoy it. Cheers, buddy.
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
It's going all right. How are you today, Marcus?
Good, Pastor Kevin. It's a good Monday. A little bit of snow.
That's right. Yeah, it's coming down nice and softly, slowly. So I feel like it's done this every day for like the last several weeks.
It's true. I get to this point, like, just being up here now for a few years, it's like, people ask, what's the weather going to be like? I don't even look. It's going to be cold and snowing.
Yeah.
Different layers of cold, but I still wear the same jacket and gloves no matter how cold or not. I just mutter to myself if it's super cold, and that's about the only difference. It just is.
Just go with it, man. It's wild. Yeah. It's like, it's in some ways disorienting when it's like, you know, what day of the week is it? What month is it? You
right.
know, like, gosh, it's like Groundhog Day a little bit.
Okay.
You know? But it's nice. I mean, I prefer this. Last year, we didn't hardly have, so this is my second winter here.
It's true.
Last winter, we didn't really have that much snow. I mean, it was pretty...
Yeah, we faked you out last season what winter could look like. It was an intro.
And as I understand it, like, someone said the other day, like, yeah, we're almost into the heart of winter.
Yeah.
I was like, what? I thought we were like...
It's like end of February when everyone else is getting warm. We're just digging in.
We're just
digging in
just
for
starting
it.
up.
Oh, man.
But it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, we have an interesting podcast today because we had an interesting sermon yesterday.
Throwback.
Retro. You
Yeah.
know? So a sermon from Pastor Aaron, the first time Saints Peter and Paul went through the story.
Yep.
So same section where we're at presently, but yeah, Aaron had intended to preach and this last Sunday, but came down sick and but had this resource and said, "Hey, let's go with this."
It was cool watching the video he'd recorded 5 years ago. I think we may mention just before service was starting, going, man, technology's come a long way. Because it used to be Pastor Aaron just recorded with his iPhone on the seat and then just posted online for us, which is great. Now we have a whole media booth system that takes care of everything like that. But how cool to listen to the sermon, the message, the reflection 5 years ago, same text, to see how life is similar and different at the same time too. I mean, some people are listening to it going, wait, did he do this on Saturday? What's going on?
Where are we?
Is he okay? He mentioned having 2 kids. I think he has 4 kids. Like,
right.
Did he not sleep well last night? What's going on? And then once they got past that noise of that stuff and they kind of dug into it, and they're like, oh, okay, now we get what's happening.
Mm-hmm. A little disorienting at the start, but yeah. I mean, it was interesting, especially, you know, like, it wasn't right away in the sermon, but the part that caught in my ear was he was talking about the news cycle and like division within the news cycle. He's like, you know, you don't have to look far. And like that felt very like present day. That felt very like 2020, 2021, 2022, I guess now.
Right.
But it's like, you know, we hear so much of polarization, tribalism, and kind of, you know, the two sides of the aisle, which you talked about in the sermon as well, you know, kind of going at it. And it's like, well, but man, this is 5 years ago.
Right.
Like some time has gone by, but I mean, some of the stuff, it's like, this is still today.
Oh, for sure. I think the vision has been there onset since the garden and the separation there. But like, yeah, it's not too different. There's different people heading up different divisions or different. Usually, it's still the same parties or same groups or things, but it's the same constant of tension over you're thinking one thing, I'm thinking another thing. Who's going to conquer whom? And tension ensues, you know, and away they go. So, yeah, it's, I don't know, like, in some ways I listen to the messages of the Israelites and the people working through all these tensions and going, why didn't they learn from that? Like, why are they doing the same silly things again and again? But then here we are listening to the message from 5 years ago and going, it sounds like yesterday. I mean, like,
Right.
huh?
Yeah.
What has changed or what hasn't changed? Or what do we do going forward knowing that this tension always is going to exist?
Mm-hmm.
How do we respond to it with that knowledge of knowing, okay, it's going to be here? How much energy do we waste on the tension of the division?
Mm-hmm.
And where can we create unity, connection? I love dancing in the gray areas. There's black and white in that middle ground. Mm-hmm. And from a humor perspective, I think a lot of humor comes in the gray. And like you can joke with people about stuff that's like, don't go too far. Mm-hmm. If you go too light, it's not funny. It's just like a dad joke. It's just like, I don't know. Uh-huh. But like that gray area is that kind of sweet spot of like, you can find a mutual understanding and grounding. I don't know. What do you think?
So even like interrelationally, you're saying, like with people, like to try and get past that tension of the division. In the sermon, if I remember it right, like Aaron, he did talk about another tension, I think, that he saw as like the core, right? Mm. And that was this idea of basically choosing like what's right and wrong for ourselves.
Right.
And you mentioned the garden, like this being kind of like, hey, it's just, has anything changed since the fall? And in that sense, like not really, right?
Right.
Like we're all faced with this challenge of when we face decisions in our day-to-day, like whose voice are we ultimately listening to? And not that God gives us a map for every single minute decision that we got to make, but there's those bigger ones or those ones that happen maybe in spur of the moment or they're charged emotionally. Mm-hmm. And the problem that was going on, in the story was, it was Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, and then this guy Jeroboam, and they're kind of both vying for the kingdom. But Rehoboam is he doesn't listen to the counsel of Solomon. He doesn't listen to the older folks. He listens to the young guys. He kind of has his, he's like trying to be macho or something, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't go over well, and the people are like, forget this, we don't want you. And what's interesting was even in the sermon, Aaron was even saying that response of the people wasn't necessarily like a godly response to, it was a human one. If you got
it's not very respectful to your leaders.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, we're kind of faced every day with decisions. When I think of how to navigate the tension, I don't. How do you Okay, let me slow down. I'm muttering lots of words. In Scripture, we see this kind of repeat. Mm-hmm. That's what you were saying. It's like, guys, why can't you get it straight? Like you're doing this tomfoolery in the wilderness, and now you're doing it here in the Promised Land, and you're going to keep doing it until you end up in exile.
King after king after king.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I think about my own life, and I'm like, oof, okay. Well, now that hurts a little more to think about. Okay. Like, what are the things in my life that I keep coming back to, and I keep repeating?
Yeah.
Even though I know it's like, this isn't good for me. I've been here before.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, like, listeners, if you've been in that situation before where, you kind of stumble in some way again, and it's like, oh, gee, I remember this. This isn't the first time. Why did I do this again?
Yeah. Well, you alluded to earlier with the weather being Groundhog's Day, which is ironically the same connection that we get in this rhythm again and again and again. And I actually just watched the movie last night that referenced Groundhog's Day and asked the question, how do you get out of Groundhog? How do you get out of that day, Bill Murray? And so you got to have that perfect day. And I think that's a lot of times what we try to do in this situation too, is we seek to make the best thing happen, to make it different, versus, surrendering the day that God's in control of it and honoring and seeing the beauty that's already there. And acknowledging that, God, you're sovereign over all of this. You let bad things happen, all this stuff happens in the mix of it too, but where does my energy, passion, stress, where should it go? It should all go to God. So I don't keep stuck in this Groundhog's Day rhythm of, it's again and again, oh, I just got to do better next time. Or like, how was your weekend? It was all right. I'll have a better one next week. And But like, how do you do that? Do you do it by surrendering it, like giving it to God, or do you do it by, oh, I gotta do this, this, and this? It doesn't mean you can't just like sit back and go, all right, God, wait for a good weekend. There's kind of a both end, but the orientation of where do you put it and how do you arrange that or acknowledge it too, I guess.
Yeah, like there's a certain like weariness to life. I feel like a downer, but I mean, all these things that we seek to do and strive to do, and especially when you feel like they're like crumbling a bit, and it's like, build them back up, and they crumble again. You build them back up. We talk about surrendering. I think of Solomon, so like he, for a long time in his reign, things were going super great.
Yeah.
It was tons of building, tons of like, oh man, this is, we're on the high end. I got a palace. We're building this massive temple for God. Our borders are getting strengthened. We got all these partnerships. But he had kind of from an early point in his life really surrendered it over to God.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to strive for the health, wealth, and best weekend.
Right.
But kind of said, God, I don't really know what I'm doing. Can you help me to do what I'm here to do? And I think that does lead to a lot of appreciation in your life when you're able to stop just trying to stop to holding on to everything, because stuff always falls through the cracks anyway.
I think slowing down and just finding acknowledging, seeing the beauty in that. They joke about, like, when was the last time you actually stopped and smelled roses? Like, did you actually slow down, take the pain of bending over, smelling, like, you can acknowledge that, like, oh yeah, it's a good day outside. Did you, like, really embrace it, enjoy it, like
pick up a clump of snow?
Yeah, exactly.
Throw it in a ball form at a stop sign.
We lament, like, when we're sick. I wish I was healthy like I was, but we don't necessarily wake up and celebrate. Thanks for a new day. Thanks for the health that I have right now.
Today.
Like, it could be fleeting. It could be changing. Like, it could change at any moment.
Yeah, and there was actually there was a member yesterday that shared about one of their family members passing away, and it was sudden. It was unexpected, and part of what they were sharing with me after was that exact idea of you really, it takes a moment like that to kind of jolt us awake, and to get us to realize, wow, you really only have today.
Right.
You never know what the future is going to bring. And so, how do we stir ourselves out of this grogginess, maybe?
Yeah. It comes and goes, yeah, because you have in those moments. I had moments where, friends have died suddenly, or even we know it's coming. It still hurts. You still yearn for another day, hour, month, year in that, and you're like, I should appreciate it. But then you forget about it. It's a couple years later, and you're back to the same kind of rhythms again, unless you pause and think about it. But it's funny how you keep going back in the same rhythms. I mean, the story of the Israelites, it's almost frustrating to read. Like, they're doing the same thing again. They're doing it again and again. We're really no different. Like, there's an empathy and understanding. Like, our story, we do a lot of the same things again and again and again. Right. Generationally, we try to transition and shift. We swing one way or the other. Overcompensate sometimes and vice versa, and we see that same patterns happening again and again with the Israelites in that.
Yeah. Excuse me for all my throat clearings today, guys. Sorry about that. But what I think too, coming back to that surrender language, that does also help get you out of maybe that. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's this idea that we want life to be a certain way. We're trying to achieve it. It's not happening. That's frustrating. We turn to this vice or that vice, and then we're like, oh, why am I here again? This is also not satisfying. And it's kind of back around. But surrendering, it's a recognition that, who do you surrender to, right? You surrender to someone who is bigger than you.
Yeah.
Right? You surrender to someone who's like, well, you won the battle, right?
Yeah.
Like, you won the war. I surrender, right? It's so like when we surrender, we're really just honoring or acknowledging that there is someone who is bigger than us.
Right.
And who is in control, actually.
That's First Commandment stuff. You know, just like
who's
honor
your God?
God. God is God. You know, it's not me. You know, the Israelites have the same mystery too in this section of the story, where the golden calves show back up again in this narrative, and they just kind of go along with culture in that situation. They know that God was the one that saved them and carried them through this whole thing.
Yeah.
But they just kind of go along with it, and all of a sudden they're worshiping this golden calf thing again, which isn't an original idea. We read about that many chapters ago.
Right.
Too. I mean, they ground it up and had to drink it. Like, I mean,
yeah, you'd think they remember.
It was pretty intense, you know. Like, there was no rod spared in that situation at all. But here we are again, and just kind of go along. Don't disrupt. Just go along with the narrative that's there. We talked about that in youth group yesterday too. Just quite quickly, like where are these golden calves popping up in our lives, in our stories, in our community, that we just go along with it, even though we know from our time in Scripture and with God, in our church community, that this may or not be right. Like, we shouldn't do this. This doesn't honor God. This doesn't put God first.
Yeah.
But we just kind of go along with it.
Right, which I think, you know, in some ways, to me, like, speaks of the importance of really handing down learned knowledge. You know, and that's, I mean, this is going, you know, maybe a week before to the Week of Solomon, where we're talking about wisdom. But that's what wisdom is, right? It's just passing down kind of like learned knowledge from one's life. Yeah. Right. So if I'm sitting here and I've, you know, repeated this mistake again and again and again, okay, hopefully I learn from that. And then who is it that's in my life that I see maybe also in the same place, a similar place I've been? Yeah. And how can I kind of, you know, walk alongside them and share with them my own experience and what it resulted of? Yeah. You know, I mean, you think about the Israelites, like if they would pass that story down about drinking the gold, you know, after the first golden calf, you'd think they'd be kind of, you know, hard pressed to do it again. Right. You know, but at some point it gets lost. And we actually see this in the book of Kings as well. There's going to be a king, I want to say Josiah, who comes along, and he discovers these scrolls that have just been forgotten. Right. You know, and it's like hearkening back to the Torah. It's you know, some of these first 5 books of the Bible. He's like, oh my gosh, we gotta remember this stuff. You know, let's bring it back. Let's learn it again. You know,
which is amazing and just so comforting too, that no matter our busyness, no matter our fears, no matter our stresses and all the divisiveness, we don't need to operate out of fear, because God is still sovereign. All of a sudden, the whole nation is not followers of Yahweh. They're not acknowledging the God of Israel. The word has stayed. It still exists. Someone covers it. They read it. They experience it. There's no question to turn against everything that they know in culture and make this huge shift. I mean, it's almost a baptismal language there, this life and death, going like, there's no life here, we're getting rid of all of this stuff, we're going to do this and be in this now. I read that too from a missional background perspective and going like, that's amazing. Like, still proclaiming, sharing, living this out, mentoring it as much as possible, discipling, but going, I don't need to do it out of fear, out of what will the world look like if it doesn't have this, or what about my grandchildren, or what about this, or like, no, God's got that. Like, it's still going to continue and it's still going to maintain, and there's just I don't know why seeing that in the story, just the amount of peace in that is huge.
Well, and it's peace in the midst of the chaos, because even this idea of surrender. So God, you know, during this time with Solomon and his son Rehoboam, and this kind of struggle and strife politically over who's going to be next king, and you know, it looks really, really, really messy. Yeah. But God, He not only knows that it's going on, He actually was the one that kind of orchestrated it to a degree. Yeah. Because when Solomon turned away from Him, that's when He said, you know, I'm going to take the throne from your family. Like, sorry. Yeah. You know, this is kind of the consequence of your actions, and I'm not going to strip it from you, because I love your father David, and he walked with me. But your son Rehoboam, he's going to lose the throne. Yeah. You know, and that's not to say that our lives, you know, we're not puppets on a string, and God's not forcing us to do anything. But what it shows is like God's not fazed by anything we see today,
No.
right? So when you see the division today, or if you're afraid of maybe Christianity in our land, like waning, I mean these are things that grieve, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. We don't need to operate out of a fear-based.
No.
Because, like you said, the Word, God Himself, like He's still King. He's still enthroned.
Yeah.
He's not going anywhere. He is always here to be found. And if we keep surrendering, we'll keep acknowledging that He is here. And our prayer would be too that others might catch what we have, see what we have, and especially if we're operating out of more of a peace than a fear, because fear mongering, I mean, the world's got enough of that already.
Yeah, it's true, and that's not the narrative that Christ has ever operated out of, creation has ever existed in. It is a huge motivator, but one that's depleting, one that's focused on I, rather than a surrendering language of focusing on God, your God. It's fearing that God, you can't do this. You're not big enough. So I better do it. It's all on me. There's a control narrative in it. And just that whole victim mentality of, that's not a good spot to be in. And you can dig in that somewhere else. But anyways, like that narrative of fear pushes and motivates, but there's no life in that. That's, again, going back to the garden. I mean, that's the narrative of, Adam and Eve. They're fearful of what they were lacking of. Is this really going to be it? And you don't want that. Like, oh, really? I don't know. I mean, that's Satan language. It's divisive in that nature. Fear prevents us from being able to hear each other because we're more fearful about the response that we think that they're going to make versus being able to sit in that moment, see the rose, bend over, smell the rose, experiencing that situation out of lack of fear and being able to listen to the person across the line and have a conversation,
right? And
have an understanding, and still accepting each other with different views, perspectives, narratives, and saying, well, no matter where you are at, people need to know this peace that surpasses wherever we're at, and going, let's keep doing this.
Yeah. The other kind of like one of the major thought I have about all this too is we've talked a lot about like the cycle, right? This kind of repetition, that we see in the Israelites throughout this story. We see maybe in our own lives, right? But, and this is drawn out from watching that sermon yesterday from 5 years ago, even though so often life feels cyclical, it does actually move forward.
Yeah.
And there is growth, and there is, a building. Or sometimes a tearing down, but then for something new. Like there's newness. So, for instance, in that video, right, they were talking about a Jared. That's the son of our secretary, office manager, Judy. Yep. So Jared Fensky. At the time, he was he probably hadn't even started seminary, had he? I think he was just interested in going into church work.
He was in a pre-Semmet.
Undergrad, somewhere. And but now he's like right now this year serving as a vicar.
Yeah. So
like an intern pastor. So like there's growth, there's movement.
Yeah.
Even in this place, like you had just recently arrived.
Yeah.
Back in 2017 when that sermon happened, you'd been here for a few months. Now you've been here for a longer haul. Now Jamie Schultz here, and there's an ELC, and now I get to be here, and so there's kind of growth here. Even when you think of the Israelites, they repeat this stuff over and over and over and over, and maybe we sometimes feel like them. It's like over and over, but hold the phone. People knowing this peace and this God who is king over all, that was a pretty isolated region of the world.
Yeah. For
2,000 plus years?
Yeah.
And now Christianity is global. It's booming in Africa. I guess it's starting in China. Like it's just kind of at the precipice of like starting to see the rapid growth that Africa saw.
Okay.
Like we'll probably see that in the next like 3-4 decades.
Yeah.
In China. So it's like, even God's word in his kingdom, it is growing, it is spreading. We might not see it because like on the day-to-day, I don't even see the growth in myself.
Right.
But if I could have a conversation with Kevin 10 years ago, undoubtedly there'd be things you're like,
would you recognize each other?
Hey, I finally learned not to do that, or I finally learned how to do this. So
nice
don't
beard.
Yeah, maybe. So don't listener, don't get trapped in, because I think that's Satan language too. Don't get trapped in the the lie that you aren't changing or growing, and that you're just stuck where you are, because we are growing and we're learning, and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes so slow that it feels like we're not going anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
But as we continue to surrender really to God, He'll continue to open us up more and more to His Word, His wisdom, to new opportunities, new relationships, to growth, and sometimes growth through the hard things that we're trying to change. Even we might look back 5-10 years and say, "Wow, that really shaped me." Now I didn't realize it at the time, but now I'm thankful, even as hard as it is to say, like, wow, I'm thankful I had to go through this or that because of where it put me today.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
I don't know. Try to be positive.
Lean into those growth moments, as hard as it is, or reflect back on them to see the wisdom that is in those moments, for sure. Huge advice.
Yeah. So sweet. Well, we'll keep tracking. There's a storyline going on in the story, and in your life, and in mine.
Yeah.
And in yours. And we'll keep tracking with it, see what God's doing. As always, we hope that something stood out to you in this episode. Maybe it's something that can spark a conversation with you and someone else. Take it, use it, and we'll keep learning and growing together. Good to be with you, man.
You too, man. Have a good week.